Well, I'm back. And remember that pen I told you about at the end of the last episode? The one I accidentally dropped near Genevieve's feet? The one she would normally have picked up immediately while teasing me for being hopelessly clumsy? Yeah, that pen. At the time, it seemed like such a small thing. A stupid little moment that shouldn't have mattered. But after spending the entire evening watching Genevieve avoid me, it felt like confirmation of every fear running through my head. Because she didn't pick it up. She didn't tease me. She barely even reacted. And somehow, that hurt more than I care to admit. What I didn't know then was that a few hours later, that same night would take a turn I never saw coming. Because after midnight, everything changed. Around midnight, her father finally fell asleep. Genevieve adjusted his blanket carefully before kissing his forehead softly. "I'll be upstairs," she whispered. Then she turned to leave. And something inside me snapped. I followed her out quietly before catching her wrist near the hallway leading to the kitchen. She froze immediately. "Rhea." "No." My voice came out rougher than intended. Genevieve turned slowly toward me. I could barely breathe properly. "So I'm the only one who gets hurt here?" Her expression shifted instantly. But I continued before she could interrupt. "You made me tell you how I felt. You kissed me back. You told me you didn't regret it. And now suddenly you can barely look at me." She stayed quiet. That somehow made me more emotional. I genuinely don't understand what changed. Still nothing. No defense. No denial. She just stood there letting me speak. And somehow that hurt even more. Finally, after I stopped talking, Genevieve inhaled slowly before speaking very quietly. "It took everything in me not to kiss you in front of my father tonight. That stole every remaining thought from my head." She stepped slightly closer. Not enough but enough that my pulse became uneven instantly. "You dropped your pen near me," she continued softly. "Do you know what I was thinking about?" I said nothing. Genevieve's eyes finally lifted to mine fully for the first time in days. "Kissing you against that wall." My heart nearly stopped. "I wanted to touch you so badly tonight that I had to keep leaving the room." The confession landed somewhere deep inside me. Painfully deep. "So why are you avoiding me?" I whispered. Genevieve looked away briefly before answering. "Because I love my husband." There it was. The sentence I had been dreading. But before I could step back, she continued softly. "And I don't understand why I feel this way about you." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I have never looked at anyone else while loving him. Never. And now suddenly I can't think properly whenever you're near me." I stayed completely still. Genevieve laughed softly then, but there was sadness in it. "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" "I think about kissing you constantly." That confession nearly destroyed me. She wrapped her arms around herself before continuing quietly. "I'm trying to do the right thing, Rhea. By pretending I don't exist?" "No," she whispered immediately. "By trying not to ruin your life." I frowned slightly. "My life?" Genevieve finally looked directly at me again. "I'm a public figure. I'm married. If this ever became public, you know who gets destroyed first." I hated how right she was. "You deserve someone who can hold your hand publicly," she continued softly. "Someone who doesn't have to hide you." My chest tightened painfully. "And what if I don't care?" "But I care," she whispered immediately. "Because I refuse to make you my secret just so I can selfishly keep you close." That silenced me completely. Then softly, almost painfully gentle, Genevieve reached up and kissed my forehead. "I want you happy," she whispered, "even if it can't be with me." And then she walked away, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen feeling like my entire chest had been ripped open quietly. The worst part? I still loved her after that. Maybe even more. The next few days became unbearable in the quietest way possible. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the problem. Genevieve stopped avoiding me after our conversation in the kitchen, but she became careful instead. Careful with her eyes. Careful with her words. Careful with how close she stood near me. And somehow that hurt even worse. Because now every interaction felt controlled. measured. Like she was constantly fighting herself. Her husband had traveled again 3 days earlier for another business trip in Hong Kong, which meant the mansion returned to its usual nighttime rhythm. Just me, Genevieve, her father, and all the feelings neither of us knew what to do with. But despite Daniel being gone again, Genevieve never crossed the line with me anymore. No touching, no lingering moments, nothing. Sometimes I caught her staring at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes she caught me doing the same thing. And then both of us would immediately look away like teenagers incapable of functioning properly. It was exhausting. One evening I arrived to find Genevieve sitting beside her father while he argued dramatically about travel pillows. "I'm telling you they're a scam," he said the second he saw me. "Nobody has ever looked comfortable wearing one of those things." Genevieve laughed softly. "Dad, you said the same thing about wireless headphones and now you sleep with them. That's different." "It's literally not." I smiled quietly while checking his medication. Then her father looked toward Genevieve again. "So how long are you disappearing this time?" My hand stopped moving. Genevieve glanced at him quickly. "Dad." "What?" he asked innocently. The nurse should know too. Something cold settled inside my chest instantly. "Know what?" I looked toward Genevieve slowly. She was already looking at her father like she wanted to physically mute him. "You got better just to expose me, huh?" she muttered. Her father grinned proudly. "Recovery changes people." I frowned slightly. "What's happening?" Genevieve inhaled softly before standing. "I was going to tell you myself. But the damage was already done. Because suddenly I felt nervous for reasons I didn't understand yet." Her father answered before she could. "She's traveling again. 3 months." The room went completely silent in my head. 3 months. I stared at Genevieve. She avoided my eyes immediately. 7 countries in 3 months, her father continued proudly, completely unaware he was emotionally ruining someone's life. Big campaign. Apparently, the entire fashion industry needs my daughter's face. Genevieve rubbed her forehead. "Dad, please." But I barely heard them anymore. 3 months. My chest suddenly felt too tight. Because wanting someone you can't have is one thing. But wanting someone who is also leaving? That was worse. Much worse. Finally, Genevieve looked at me carefully. I was going to explain. I nodded once. But honestly, I couldn't speak properly. Because all I could think was, she knew. She knew she was leaving and never told me. And somehow that hurt more than it should have. Her father looked between both of us slowly. Then wisely pretended to become fascinated by the television. Genevieve stood awkwardly before asking quietly, "Can we talk outside for a minute?" I picked up the patient chart immediately. "Nope. Not necessary." Her face changed instantly. "Rhea, if you want me to stop coming because your dad is getting better now, that's completely fine." Her father immediately sat up straighter. "I absolutely still need my nurse." That almost made me smile despite everything. Genevieve shook her head. "That's not what this is." I kept writing down his vitals calmly even though my chest felt awful. "We still have 1 month left on the contract anyway." "Actually," Genevieve said carefully, "I was thinking about extending it." That made me finally look up. She swallowed softly before continuing. 6 more months. With increased pay. Now her father was looking between us openly like someone watching a tennis match. But I understood what mattered underneath the offer. The contract wasn't really about her father anymore. She just didn't want me gone when she came back. And somehow that realization only hurt more. Because if she wanted me that badly, why did she keep pushing me away? I looked back down at the chart quietly. "If you want me to continue taking care of your father, that's my job." The moment the word job left my mouth, Genevieve looked genuinely hurt. Good. Because I was hurting too. She stayed quiet for a few seconds before nodding once. Right. Then she left the room. And somehow watching her walk away still affected me every single time. About 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Genevieve calling. I stared at the screen without answering. It rang again immediately. I finally picked up quietly. Hello. For a second, she didn't speak. Then softly, can you come to my room? I closed my eyes briefly. Genevieve. It's not what you think, she interrupted quickly. I just want to talk. I hesitated. Everything about this felt dangerous. But eventually I whispered. Okay. It was my first time entering her room. And somehow that alone felt intimate. The lights were dim. One side of the bed untouched. Her suitcase open near the couch. Genevieve stood near the window with her back facing me. She spoke before turning around. I probably owe you an explanation. I leaned lightly near the door instead of moving closer. Explanation for what? You employed me. I'm the idiot who fell in love with my employer. Genevieve turned immediately after hearing that. Then, before I could react properly, she crossed the room and placed her fingers gently against my lips. The touch silenced me instantly. Her eyes looked exhausted. Like she hadn't been sleeping properly either. I didn't tell you because I was scared, she admitted quietly. I frowned slightly. Of me? No, she laughed softly. Of myself. Then she moved her hand away slowly. I signed this contract almost a year ago, she explained. Before Dad got sick. Before, her eyes lifted to mine carefully. Before you. Something about hearing that affected me deeply. I tried getting out of it, she continued quietly. I even renegotiated it down to 3 months because I used Dad as an excuse. I stared at her silently. Genevieve's voice softened further. I didn't want to leave while things between us felt like this. That ache inside my chest returned immediately. Then she admitted something even quieter. I also thought maybe distance would help. I laughed once bitterly. Help who? You. That answer frustrated me instantly. You don't get to decide what helps me. I know, she whispered. But Rhea, I don't know how to love you correctly. The honesty in that sentence nearly ruined me. Genevieve looked down briefly before continuing. I keep thinking maybe if I disappear for a while, you'll meet someone better. Someone easier. Someone free. Then she smiled sadly. Even though every selfish part of me is screaming not to let anyone kiss you the way I did. My heart physically hurt hearing that. And suddenly anger replaced some of the sadness. You were really just going to leave without telling me? Her eyes filled instantly. I was going to tell you tonight. If your dad hadn't mentioned it, would you have? Genevieve stayed quiet. That silence answered enough. I laughed softly. No, seriously. I shook my head slowly. You would have let me walk in here one night and hear from the staff that you were gone? That's not fair. No, what's not fair is making me fall for you and then disappearing. Tears gathered in her eyes immediately. And seeing her cry should have softened me. It didn't. Not yet. Because I was hurt too. Genevieve cried quietly after that. Not dramatic crying. Not loud. Which somehow made it worse. Because Genevieve Vale was the kind of woman who always held herself together in public. Elegant. Composed. Untouchable. And now she was standing in front of me with tears sliding silently down her face because of me. Please don't look at me like that, she whispered. I laughed softly in disbelief. Like what? Like I broke something inside you. You did. That answer landed hard. I saw it in the way her face crumpled slightly afterward. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Genevieve wiped beneath her eyes quickly before forcing herself to continue. I know I handled this badly. Badly? I repeated quietly. Genevieve, you kissed me, disappeared emotionally for days, then planned to leave the country without telling me. I was scared. And you think I wasn't? She stayed quiet again. Then softly she said, I thought maybe if I stayed away long enough, you would stop loving me. That almost made me angry. You really think this is that easy for me? No, she whispered immediately. That's exactly why I'm terrified. I looked away briefly before speaking again. You don't get to decide what's best for me while keeping me completely in the dark. I know. And you don't get to kiss me like that and then treat me like I imagined everything. Her breathing became uneven again. I never wanted you to feel unwanted. Well, congratulations, I muttered quietly. You failed. That one made her cry harder. Immediately, I regretted it. I exhaled sharply and rubbed my forehead. This is exactly why I didn't want this. Genevieve looked up helplessly. Didn't want what? To fall for someone I can't have. The room became quiet after that. Outside the windows, rain had started again lightly against the glass. And somehow the sound made everything feel even sadder. Genevieve walked closer slowly, carefully, like she wasn't sure I would let her. I need you to understand something, she whispered. I didn't answer, but I didn't stop her either. When I avoided you, she continued softly, it wasn't because I regretted kissing you. Her eyes lifted fully to mine. It was because I liked it too much. That confession nearly broke me. Genevieve laughed weakly through tears. You know what scared me most? What? The fact that I couldn't stop thinking about doing it again. My chest tightened painfully. She stepped even closer. Close enough that I could smell her perfume again. Close enough that if either of us lost control, this conversation would end very differently. I have spent my whole life knowing exactly who I was, she whispered. And then suddenly you happened. I swallowed hard. Genevieve. No, let me finish. She wiped her face again quickly. I don't know how to do this correctly. I don't know how to love a woman. I don't even know why it's you specifically. She laughed softly once. You are literally just a nurse taking care of my father, and somehow you've completely destroyed my ability to think properly. Despite everything, that almost made me smile. Almost. Then her expression changed again. More serious this time. But I know this part for sure. My pulse became uneven immediately. Genevieve looked directly into my eyes before saying quietly, I have never missed someone this much while they were still standing in front of me. That one hurt. Deeply. Because I understood exactly what she meant. We were already grieving each other before anything had even begun. Then she whispered my name softly. Rhea. I looked at her finally. Really looked at her. And that was my mistake. Because Genevieve was beautiful enough to ruin people even without trying. The tears. The trembling voice. The way she kept looking at me like I was both the safest and most dangerous thing in her life. It destroyed my remaining self-control completely. I moved closer before I could stop myself. Genevieve inhaled shakily the second my hand touched her waist lightly. Neither of us spoke. We just stood there breathing unevenly while the tension between us became unbearable again. Then suddenly Genevieve whispered, I will leave my husband for you. Everything inside me stopped. I stared at her completely stunned. And honestly, I don't think she planned to say it either. Because the second the words left her mouth, she looked shocked herself. Genevieve. I mean it, she said immediately, tears gathering again. I know how insane this sounds, but I have never felt like this before. I stepped back instantly. Not because I didn't want her. Because I did. Too much. That's not something you say in the middle of emotional chaos, I said carefully. But it's true. You love him. I do, she whispered painfully. That's what's destroying me. I ran a hand through my hair slowly. This isn't fair to Daniel. I know. And it's not fair to you either. That made her laugh weakly. Well, it's definitely not fair to my sanity. I should not have smiled at that. But I did. Because even emotionally wrecked, Genevieve still somehow sounded like herself. Then suddenly she looked nervous again. More hesitant. Can I ask you something selfish? I frowned slightly. Depends. Her voice became quieter. I leave tomorrow morning. That sentence alone hurt. Genevieve looked down briefly before continuing. I asked them to delay my flight by 2 days. I blinked slowly. I told the agency I needed more time with my father. But both of us knew that wasn't the full truth. Her eyes lifted carefully back to mine. I wanted 2 more days with you. My chest tightened immediately. Then softly she asked, would you let me kiss you again before I go? That question nearly destroyed me. Because she sounded hopeful. Terrified. and heartbreakingly sincere all at once. I looked away briefly before answering honestly. I want that more than I should. Genevieve's breathing caught softly. But I forced myself to look back at her. But I don't know if kissing you again will make surviving the next 3 months easier or impossible. The silence after that felt fragile. Then Genevieve smiled sadly through tears. Probably impossible. Unfortunately. She was right. I didn't sleep after leaving Genevieve's room that night. I tried. But every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing her voice again. I will leave my husband for you. It sounded impossible. Dangerous. Like something said in the middle of emotional chaos that would disappear once morning came. And maybe that was what hurt most. Because some reckless part of me wanted to believe her. But reality always returned eventually. Reality looked like wedding rings, shared homes, public appearances, a husband who loved her. So by morning, I had convinced myself not to take the confession seriously. Which was exactly why I agreed when Camille asked to see me. We met near the hospital during my day off. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet cafe across the street where exhausted medical workers practically lived on caffeine and poor life decisions. Camille smiled the second she saw me. You look terrible, she said while sitting down. That's such a romantic greeting. I try. That made me laugh softly for the first time in almost 24 hours. Camille studied me carefully afterward though. Not casually. Like she was trying to figure out how much damage had already been done inside me. You really like her, she said quietly. I froze briefly. Because I had never actually said it aloud. Camille sighed softly before leaning back in her chair. You don't have to panic. I figured it out weeks ago. I looked down at my coffee. She's married. I know. And I'm an idiot. You are emotionally compromised, Camille corrected gently. Different diagnosis. I huffed a laugh despite myself. Then silence settled briefly between us. Camille broke it first. You know what the worst part is? She asked quietly. I looked up. I genuinely like you, Rhea. That one landed harder than I expected. Camille smiled faintly. And unfortunately, you're the kind of person people accidentally fall in love with. That feels medically inaccurate. I'm serious. Her voice softened slightly afterward. I know you're emotionally unavailable right now. Honestly, I don't even think your heart belongs to you anymore. She paused. But I still don't want you out of my life. I stared at her quietly. Camille shrugged lightly. So maybe we stop trying to force this relationship thing immediately. She smiled softly. Maybe we just exist first. Something inside my chest loosened unexpectedly. Because there was no pressure in her voice. No manipulation. Just honesty. I do want to try, I admitted quietly. I think I'm just learning how. Camille's expression warmed instantly. That's enough for me. And for the first time in days, I felt like maybe my life was not completely collapsing. We had dinner afterward. Walked around the city for a while. Camille talked about absolutely everything with dramatic, unnecessary detail, while I mostly listened and laughed. And for a few hours, Genevieve stopped hurting quite so loudly inside my chest. Until I returned to the mansion that night. The second I walked into the room, I knew something felt wrong. Genevieve wasn't there. Usually by that hour, she was already curled on the sofa beside her father's bed pretending she wasn't exhausted. But tonight her spot was empty. Her father noticed me immediately. Nurse, he said tiredly, can you check on Genevieve later? I looked up quickly. Is she okay? She claims she's fine. He frowned slightly. But she delayed her flight again this morning and locked herself in her room afterward. My chest tightened immediately. She delayed the trip again? He nodded. Says she's exhausted. The strange thing was, he sounded genuinely worried. Not suspicious. Not knowing. Just concerned about his daughter. I tried to keep my expression neutral while checking his medication. I'll check on her later, I said quietly. By midnight, he was asleep. The house had gone silent again. And despite every part of me saying this was a terrible idea, I still found myself standing outside Genevieve's bedroom door. I knocked softly. No response. I waited a second before knocking again. Still nothing. Then quietly I said, "Genevieve? It's Rhea." The door opened almost immediately, and the sight of her nearly wrecked me. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. But tonight she also looked tired. Eyes slightly swollen. Hair messy. Like she had either been crying or trying very hard not to. For a second neither of us spoke. Then Genevieve stepped aside silently to let me in. The room smelled faintly like her perfume and expensive candles. And suddenly I understood why entering someone's bedroom felt far more intimate than kissing them. "You're not sick," I said carefully after studying her face. Genevieve leaned lightly against the window beside her bed. "No." "Then why are you hiding in here making your father worry?" Something flickered across her expression briefly. Guilt maybe. I didn't mean to worry him. I crossed my arms lightly. "You leave tomorrow, and instead of spending time with him, you're locked in your room avoiding everyone." Her eyes lifted slowly toward mine, including me. There it was. Finally. The truth sitting openly between us. And suddenly every emotion I had spent the entire day suppressing came back all at once. I laughed once softly in disbelief. "Do you know what you've done to me?" Genevieve stayed quiet. So I kept going. "You kissed me. Told me you didn't regret it. Then spent days pretending I barely existed." Pain crossed her face immediately. "You ignored my messages. Avoided looking at me. And now you're leaving." "Rhea." "No," I shook my head quickly. "You don't get to interrupt me this time." Genevieve fell silent instantly. My voice lowered afterward. "You ruined me for anyone else, and somehow I'm still the one standing here worrying about whether you've eaten dinner." Her eyes filled again. "And somehow that only made everything worse." "You have a husband who loves you," I continued quietly. "A whole life waiting for you outside this room. So why are you crying like I'm the one abandoning you?" Genevieve covered her mouth briefly, like she was trying to stop herself from breaking completely. Then finally she whispered, "Because I don't know how to stop loving you now." The room stayed quiet after Genevieve's confession. Not awkward quiet. The dangerous kind. The kind where both people know something has already changed permanently. Genevieve stood near the window watching me carefully while I tried very hard not to look at her mouth again. Unfortunately, I failed. Her eyes softened immediately when she noticed. "You see," she whispered quietly. "That look right there is exactly why I avoided you." I exhaled slowly. "You ignored me for almost a week. I was trying not to ruin my life." The honesty in her voice made me look up at her again. Genevieve laughed softly after, and the worst part is, she admitted, it didn't even work. My chest tightened. Because mine hadn't worked either. Not the distance. Not Camille. Not logic. Nothing. "I don't understand what's happening to me," she confessed quietly. "I've never looked at anyone this way before." I stayed quiet. Genevieve stepped closer slowly. "I love my husband," she whispered honestly. "That's why this feels so terrifying." There was no manipulation in her voice. No lies. And somehow that made everything hurt worse. Because Daniel was good to her. We both knew that. "I don't want to destroy your marriage," I said quietly. Genevieve's eyes dropped briefly before lifting back to mine. "And I don't want to destroy you either." That sentence nearly broke me. The room became quiet again. Then softly she said, "But when I think about leaving tomorrow without kissing you." Her voice failed slightly there. Like even saying it aloud affected her. I felt my pulse shift immediately. Genevieve noticed. Of course she noticed. She always noticed everything about me now. "I tried staying away from you," she whispered carefully. "I tried convincing myself this would disappear if I ignored it long enough." I swallowed slowly. And a weak smile appeared briefly on her face. "And now you're standing in my bedroom looking at me like that." I laughed softly under my breath. "That sounds like you're blaming me." "I absolutely am." That finally made me smile. A real one. And Genevieve stared at it for a second too long before speaking again. "You make me feel insane, Rhea." The way she said my name did something dangerous to my heartbeat. Then quietly she asked, "Do you still want to kiss me?" I should have said no. Instead, I answered honestly, "Yes." Genevieve inhaled shakily the second I said it. And then neither of us spoke again. Because words had become useless at that point. I crossed the space between us first this time. Slowly, giving her enough time to stop me if she wanted. But Genevieve didn't move away. Didn't hesitate. Didn't even breathe properly. Her eyes stayed on mine until the very last second before my mouth touched hers. And this kiss felt completely different from the first one. The kitchen kiss had been confusion. Impulse. Shock. This one was intentional. Soft at first. Careful. Like both of us were still learning each other. Genevieve made the quietest sound against my mouth and suddenly my entire body forgot how to function normally. My hand moved lightly to her waist. Her fingers tightened around the front of my shirt immediately. And for one terrifying second, I genuinely forgot she was married. Forgot where we were. Forgot every reason this was wrong. Because Genevieve kissed like someone trying to say everything she was too afraid to admit aloud. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing unevenly. Genevieve rested her forehead lightly against mine for a second before laughing softly in disbelief. "This is such a disaster." I smiled despite myself. A little. A massive one, actually. That made me laugh quietly. And the way she looked at me afterward nearly ruined me all over again. Then suddenly her expression changed slightly. More hesitant. "Nobody has ever kissed me like that before," she admitted softly. Something about the vulnerability in her voice made my chest ache. I brushed my thumb lightly against her waist without thinking. Genevieve closed her eyes briefly at the touch. Then quietly she said, "Come with me tomorrow." I blinked. "What?" "The trip." She opened her eyes again. "Come with me." My heart nearly stopped. "Genevieve, I'll pay you whatever you want," she rushed out quickly. "Double your salary. Triple if you want. I can hire another nurse for my dad tomorrow morning." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're serious?" "Yes." The answer came too fast. "I don't want 3 months without seeing you." That one hurt. Deeply. Because I didn't want that either. But eventually I forced myself to shake my head slightly. "You know I can't." Pain crossed her face immediately. "Rhea, I have patience," I said softly. "I can't just disappear because my feelings got complicated." Genevieve looked down briefly after that. And for the first time since I entered the room, she genuinely looked defeated. I hated it instantly. So I touched her hand lightly. "Hey." Her eyes lifted back to mine slowly. "I'm not rejecting you." "Feels a little like it." I smiled faintly. "You're very dramatic." "My father raised me." That made both of us laugh softly again. Then I glanced toward the door. "Your dad is worried about you." Genevieve sighed quietly before nodding. "Okay." We walked downstairs together after that. And the second her father saw her enter the room, his expression relaxed immediately. "See?" Genevieve said while sitting beside him. "Still alive." "You look terrible," he grumbled. "That's hereditary." I laughed quietly while checking his medication chart. Genevieve looked at me after that, long enough that I could still feel the memory of her mouth on mine. And suddenly staying professional for the rest of the night became the hardest thing I had ever done. The next morning, I arrived unusually early before leaving for the hospital. And somehow Genevieve was already awake. Standing outside her bedroom door at barely 6 in the morning like she had been waiting for me. "You're awake early," I whispered. "You were trying to leave without seeing me." I smiled slightly. "I have work." Genevieve looked around briefly to make sure the hallway was empty before grabbing my wrist softly. "Come here for a second." Before I could even respond, she had already pulled me inside her room. The second the door closed behind us, she kissed me again. When we finally separated, Genevieve rested her forehead briefly against my shoulder and laughed quietly. I'm supposed to leave in a few hours and somehow this feels worse now. I smiled softly. See you in 3 months? Genevieve immediately pulled back to look at me. Absolutely not. That made me laugh. I'll be back in 2 weeks. You should focus on your trip. I should focus on you. My heartbeat betrayed me instantly. Genevieve smiled slightly when she noticed. Then softly she said, I'll see you before I leave. The problem with kissing Genevieve again was that afterward, everything became worse. Because now I knew how she sounded when she was breathless. How she touched me when she forgot herself. How easily she melted against me when she stopped overthinking for 1 second. And unfortunately, my brain refused to function normally after that. The entire morning at the hospital felt unbearable. Every 5 minutes I checked my phone like an idiot. Nothing. Then 10 minutes later. Still nothing. By noon I was genuinely irritated. Which was ridiculous, because Genevieve was literally preparing for an international flight. Then finally my phone buzzed. Genevieve. Are you ignoring me already? I stared at the message for 2 full seconds before laughing softly under my breath. Rhea. Some of us actually work for a living. The reply came immediately. Genevieve. Rude. Then another message appeared before I could answer. Genevieve. I miss you already. That one hit me embarrassingly hard. I tried not to smile while walking through the corridor. Failed completely. One of the older nurses looked at me suspiciously. You're smiling at your phone during work, she said dramatically. That's either romance or criminal activity. Probably both, I muttered. Unfortunately, that was dangerously accurate. The rest of the afternoon became a disaster after that. Because Genevieve started texting constantly. Genevieve. The stylist here asked why I look happy today. Genevieve. I almost said because my nurse kissed me. Genevieve. You're ruining my professional image. I was still trying to recover from that message when another came. Genevieve. Reply in under 5 minutes or I'll assume Camille is flirting with you again. I laughed so suddenly that one of the interns nearly dropped a file beside me. You okay? He asked cautiously. No, I answered honestly. By evening, I had almost convinced myself Genevieve would probably be too busy to actually see me before leaving. Which honestly would have been smarter for both of us. Then around 6:30, chaos started happening near the front reception. Whispers. Phones appearing. People walking unusually fast. I frowned slightly while signing paperwork. What's happening? I asked another nurse. Her eyes widened dramatically. There's a celebrity downstairs. I barely reacted. Hospitals in the city occasionally had public figures visit privately. Not unusual. Then she added, She's asking for you. My heart stopped immediately. Before I could even process that sentence properly, another nurse appeared breathless beside me. Rhea, she whispered aggressively, why is Genevieve Vale in our hospital? Oh no. Absolute disaster. I closed my eyes briefly. She came to visit her father's nurse, the other nurse whispered loudly. That is literally a romance movie plot. Please stop talking. Unfortunately, things got worse when I reached the reception area. Because Genevieve was standing there wearing sunglasses and a cream-colored coat, like she wasn't currently causing nationwide emotional damage to me personally. And somehow she still looked unfairly beautiful. The receptionist looked 1 second away from fainting. Genevieve smiled the second she saw me approaching. There you are. I stopped directly in front of her. What are you doing here? She tilted her head slightly. You said you couldn't come see me before my flight. That does not mean you come to my workplace looking like a luxury perfume advertisement. That made her laugh softly. And several people nearby visibly melted over the sound. Traitors. Genevieve looked entirely too pleased with herself afterward. Your coworkers seem terrified of me. They think you're here for medical emergencies. I am, she said calmly. I frowned immediately. What? Genevieve stepped slightly closer before lowering her voice. I needed to see you before leaving or I was going to lose my mind on an international level. My pulse betrayed me instantly. I glanced around quickly. People are staring. They've been staring at me since 2018. I survived. That's not helping. Her smile widened slightly. Then one of the doctors approached carefully and offered her a private consultant room away from the crowd. Genevieve thanked him politely before looking back at me. Walk with me. I should have said no. Instead, I followed her upstairs like my self-respect had completely abandoned me. The second the private room door closed behind us, the silence changed immediately. No audience. No staff. Just us. Genevieve removed her sunglasses slowly before exhaling. Okay, she admitted softly, this might have been slightly irrational. Slightly? She smiled faintly. I told you I would see you before leaving. My chest tightened. And suddenly she looked less like a celebrity and more like the woman who had kissed me repeatedly in her bedroom a few hours ago. You really came all the way here just for that? I asked quietly. Genevieve stared at me like the answer should have been obvious. Yes. Something inside me completely gave up after that. I laughed softly while rubbing my forehead. You are unbelievable. And yet, she whispered while stepping closer, you still like me. Unfortunately, that was becoming the problem. Unfortunately, being alone with Genevieve in a private hospital room was a terrible idea. Because the second the door closed behind us, every sensible thought I had disappeared immediately. Genevieve leaned lightly against the table beside her and looked at me carefully. And there it was again. That look. The one that made me feel like she was trying to memorize me before leaving. You look tired, she said softly. I worked a double shift. She tilted her head slightly. And probably spent the entire day overthinking me. I laughed quietly. You're unbelievably confident. I kissed you this morning and you nearly forgot how to breathe afterward, she replied calmly. I think confidence is justified. My face became warm instantly. Genevieve noticed immediately and smiled to herself like she had just won something. This woman was becoming dangerous in ways I genuinely wasn't prepared for. I folded my arms lightly. You flew across the city just to flirt with me for 10 minutes? No, she paused thoughtfully. The flirting is a bonus. That made me laugh again. And for a second, Genevieve just watched me quietly. Not speaking. Not teasing. Just looking at me with that soft expression that kept undoing me piece by piece. Then she sighed dramatically. I really hate airports. You travel for a living. That doesn't mean I enjoy emotional suffering. I shook my head. You're being dramatic again. I am about to spend 3 months traveling across 7 countries while emotionally attached to my father's nurse. Let me have this. That sentence should not have sounded as attractive as it did. I looked away briefly before asking quietly, are you nervous? Genevieve's expression softened immediately. A little. About the tour? No, her eyes stayed on mine. About leaving you. That one settled deep inside my chest. Because she said it so honestly. No games. No flirting attached to it. Just truth. I leaned back slightly against the wall behind me. You know this situation is insane, right? Yes. You're a married celebrity. Yes. And I'm literally your father's night nurse. Yes. And somehow none of that is stopping this. Genevieve smiled faintly. Apparently not. Silence settled briefly after that. Comfortable this time. Then suddenly her phone buzzed on the table beside her. She glanced down and groaned softly. My manager. Shouldn't you answer? She's annoying. She's probably trying to make sure you didn't disappear before an international flight. Genevieve looked completely unapologetic. I did disappear. I laughed under my breath. Then she looked back at me again. More serious this time. Can I ask you something? That depends. If I text you too much while I'm away, will you get tired of me? The question caught me off guard completely. Because beneath all the confidence and teasing and beauty, there it was again. Fear. Real fear. I answered honestly. I don't think I could get tired of you even if I tried. Genevieve stared at me for a second after that. Like the answer affected her more than she expected. Then she smiled slowly. Softly, almost shyly. And somehow that version of her was far more dangerous than the confident one. You know, she murmured, you make it very difficult for me to behave responsibly. I laughed quietly. You were behaving responsibly before me? Absolutely. Liar. Fine, she admitted. But now it's worse. Her phone buzzed again. Then again. Then a third time. I raised an eyebrow. That seems urgent. Genevieve sighed dramatically before finally picking it up. Then her eyes narrowed slightly while reading the screen. What? I asked. My manager says if I'm not in the car downstairs in 10 minutes, she's going to start threatening people. That sounds fair. She also says social media already knows I'm in this hospital somehow. Not because Genevieve was clingy. Well, maybe slightly. But mostly because she had somehow become part of my routine without either of us noticing when it happened. Good morning texts. Pictures of terrible hotel coffee from different countries. Complaints about interviews. Updates about her father. And voice notes she always claimed were accidentally too long. By the second week of her trip, my phone barely stayed silent anymore. Genevieve. A stylist here asked if I was secretly dating someone because apparently I keep smiling at nothing. Then another message immediately followed. Genevieve. This is your fault, by the way. I was still smiling at my screen when my hospital shift finally ended that evening. Outside the entrance, Camille was leaning against her car waiting for me. The second she saw my expression, she narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Oh, that smile again. I locked my phone quickly. What smile? The one that makes me regret liking you. I laughed softly while walking toward her. That's dramatic. You make me dramatic. Camille opened the passenger door for me before shaking her head. I swear, whoever keeps texting you must be unreal. The drive to dinner was easy. Comfortable. Camille had always been easy to exist around. That was part of the problem. She was kind. Funny. Patient with me in ways I honestly did not deserve. And I kept trying to want her the way she deserved to be wanted. Unfortunately, my phone buzzed again before we had even ordered food. Then again. Then again. Camille slowly lowered her menu. You're kidding. I looked at the screen. Genevieve. I just walked into the hotel room and immediately hated it because you're not here. Then another. Genevieve. That sounded insane. Ignore me. Then immediately after. Genevieve. Actually, don't ignore me. Camille watched my face carefully across the table. And because she was observant, she caught it instantly. The smile. The complete emotional disaster happening in real time. There she is, Camille murmured quietly. I blinked. What? The person you disappear for. My chest tightened slightly. Camille leaned back in her seat afterward and crossed her arms loosely. She must be really special. I looked down at my phone briefly. And that silence alone answered enough. Camille laughed softly to herself. Wow. I'm sorry. Don't, she interrupted gently. You warned me you were emotionally complicated. That is not the wording I used. It's the wording I'm using. That made me laugh despite myself. But Camille's smile faded a little afterward. Not angry. Just sad in that quiet, mature way adults became sad when they already knew how something would end. She doesn't know how lucky she is, does she? The question caught me off guard. I frowned slightly. What makes you think that? Because if she did, Camille said softly, you wouldn't still look this conflicted every time she texts you. I didn't know what to say to that. Fortunately, the waiter arrived with food before the silence became too heavy. Dinner stayed light after that. Camille talked about work. About a terrible client she had dealt with earlier that week. About a friend trying to get back with an ex who absolutely deserved prison time instead. And slowly, thankfully, things felt normal again. Until my phone buzzed once more beside my plate. Camille looked down at it. Then up at me. You should answer her. You sure? She gave me a small smile. If you don't, you'll spend the entire dinner thinking about it anyway. Unfortunately. She was right. So I picked up the phone. Genevieve. Are you busy? Rhea. At dinner. Three dots appeared immediately. Genevieve. Oh. Then. Genevieve. Why did that make me jealous? I nearly choked on my drink. Camille noticed instantly. Oh my God, she said, laughing now. She's jealous. It's not funny. It's a little funny. I rubbed a hand over my face while trying not to smile. Camille watched me carefully for a second before speaking more softly. You really like her. This time I didn't deny it. And somehow that honesty changed something between us. Not badly. Just clearly. Camille nodded slowly afterward like she had finally accepted something she already suspected for a while. Then quietly she said, I think I've been losing you to her long before you realized it yourself. That one stayed with me the entire drive to the Vale mansion later that night. By the time I arrived for my night shift, Genevieve's father was already asleep upstairs. The house was unusually quiet. I had barely finished checking his medication schedule when my phone buzzed again. Genevieve. Did you get there safely? A ridiculous amount of warmth spread through my chest instantly. Rhea. Yes. Genevieve. Good. Then another message appeared. Genevieve. I hate that another woman got to have dinner with you tonight. I stared at the screen helplessly. Rhea. You are thousands of miles away acting possessive through international roaming. Genevieve. And? I laughed softly under my breath. Then another message came. Genevieve. Tell me honestly. Was she prettier than me? I actually covered my face with one hand after reading that. Because somehow Genevieve Vale, internationally desired supermodel, was genuinely competing with Camille in her head. Rhea. You cannot seriously be asking me that. Genevieve. Answer the question, nurse. Before I could reply, another message appeared. Genevieve. Actually, never mind. I don't want to know. I already decided I'm prettier. That one made me laugh loud enough that her father stirred slightly in his sleep upstairs. And somewhere in Paris, Genevieve immediately sent another message. Genevieve. There's the laugh I wanted. 3 weeks into Genevieve's trip, I started living in 2 different times. During the day, I worked at the hospital pretending my life was normal. At night, I took care of her father while texting a married woman across continents like my sanity had personally resigned. And somehow the worst part was that Genevieve always knew exactly when I was starting to miss her. Almost like she could feel it. That night, her father was awake longer than usual. Complaining. Criticizing the tea. Asking me the same question 3 different times because apparently rich, elderly men enjoyed psychological warfare as a hobby. You're distracted tonight, he said suddenly while I adjusted his blanket. I'm working. You're aggressively thinking while working. I stared at him cautiously. That is a terrifying observation. It's an old man observation. From the armchair beside the window, he pointed at me dramatically. My daughter does that same face whenever her husband travels too long. I nearly dropped the medication chart. Thankfully, he completely missed my reaction. She starts wandering around the house at night, he continued. Checking her phone every 3 minutes. Looking miserable. I cleared my throat quickly. That sounds exhausting. It is. Then he squinted at me suspiciously. You're doing it too. No, I'm not. You checked your phone twice during that sentence. Traitorous device. Before I could defend myself, my phone buzzed in my pocket again. Her father grinned immediately like he had just solved a murder case. This conversation is over. Boyfriend. Good night, sir. He laughed so hard he started coughing afterward. Unfortunately, the moment I stepped into the hallway and checked my phone, my entire chest softened instantly. Genevieve. I just finished an interview and accidentally called the host baby. I blinked. Rhea. Please tell me you're joking. Genevieve. I wish I was. Then another message. Genevieve. Do you know how humiliating that was? I leaned against the hallway wall laughing quietly to myself. Rhea. Maybe stop mentally dating your father's nurse during professional interviews. Genevieve. No red heart. The tiny heart at the end nearly killed me. Completely unnecessary behavior. I typed back before thinking too hard about it. Rhea, you're impossible. This time her reply took longer. Long enough that I knew she was typing seriously now instead of flirting. Genevieve. Today was exhausting. Then, Genevieve. I know this sounds ridiculous because I've only been gone a few weeks. But I miss you so much it actually hurts sometimes. That one hit differently. Because suddenly I could picture her alone in some luxury hotel room after an entire day of cameras and interviews and strangers touching her face for makeup. And despite all of that, she still wanted me. I sat down slowly on the staircase before replying. Rhea, you miss me too much. The typing bubble appeared instantly. Stopped. Appeared again. Then finally, Genevieve. I know. And somehow those two words felt more intimate than half the kisses we had shared. A few minutes later my phone rang unexpectedly. I frowned immediately before answering quietly. You know texting exists for a reason, right? Genevieve's laugh came softly through the speaker. I wanted to hear your voice. That answer warmed every exhausted part of me immediately. You're needy tonight. I'm always needy. I'm just usually better at hiding it. I smiled helplessly while leaning back against the staircase railing. In the background, I could hear faint city noise from wherever she was. Cars. Music. People. You sound tired, I said softly. I am. You should sleep. I tried. And apparently I got attached to a night nurse who talks me to sleep now. I closed my eyes briefly at that. Because there was something dangerously domestic about this. Something that felt less like an affair and more like accidentally building a life around someone. Genevieve's voice became quieter afterward. How's my dad? Stable. Did he bully you tonight? Extensively. She laughed softly again. I miss that too. Your father emotionally terrorizing me? No, her voice softened immediately. You being there. The silence after that stretched gently between us. Not awkward. Not painful. Just full. Then suddenly Genevieve spoke again. Can I ask you something? That depends. Do you still go out with Camille? I opened my eyes immediately. There it was. Jealousy. Again. She picked me up for dinner after work, I answered honestly. Genevieve went very quiet. Not angry. Which somehow felt worse. Then softly she asked. Does she make you happy? The question caught me off guard completely. Because she sounded sincere. Not possessive. Not manipulative. Just afraid. I thought about Camille's patience. Her kindness. How easy she made things feel. Then I thought about Genevieve. And how one text from her could rearrange my entire nervous system. They're different feelings, I admitted carefully. Another long silence. Then Genevieve whispered. That means there are feelings. I rubbed my forehead tiredly. Genevieve. No, it's okay, she interrupted softly. I don't really have the right to ask for exclusivity while married to another person. That sentence landed heavily between us. Because for the first time in weeks, reality entered the conversation again. Daniel. Marriage. Consequences. All the things we kept avoiding every time we missed each other too much. Genevieve exhaled quietly afterward. She started softly. I don't want to come home and realize someone else learned how to love you better while I was gone. And honestly, neither did I. For the rest of Genevieve's trip, we existed inside our phones. Texts, calls, voice notes. Tiny pieces of each other scattered across different time zones. At some point I stopped pretending it was temporary. Genevieve had become part of my daily life in the quietest, most dangerous way possible. She sent me pictures of hotel balconies at sunrise because you'd like the view. I sent her photos of terrible vending machine coffee during night shifts. She complained about stylists pinning her hair too tightly. I complained about patients who lied about taking medication. Somehow all of it started feeling normal. Like we had been doing this for years instead of months. The problem was that every time she offered to come back to LA for 2 days before leaving again, I said no. The first time she suggested it, she sounded almost hopeful. "I can fly back next weekend," she said during one of our late-night calls. "Just for 2 days." I was sitting in her father's room while he slept peacefully beside me. The lamp near the bed was the only light on. And hearing her voice that far away already hurt enough. "No," I answered quietly. Genevieve went silent immediately. "No, you leaving again afterward would destroy me." That honesty surprised both of us. I heard her breathing soften slightly through the speaker. "Rhea, I'm serious," I admitted. "Seeing you for 2 days and then watching you leave again sounds worse than not seeing you at all." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Genevieve whispered softly, "I hate that you understand me this well." Unfortunately, I did. A few nights later, we were on another call while she removed makeup after some fashion event in Paris. I could hear soft music playing faintly in the background of her hotel room. "You know," she murmured lazily, "I think my assistant is scared of me now." "Why?" "Because I snapped at someone for flirting with me today." That made me laugh softly. "You? Rude to someone?" It was very traumatic for everybody involved. Then suddenly her voice lowered. "Hold on." I heard movement. Fabric. A door shutting. Then softly she said, "Daniel's calling. I have to pick up." And there it was. That feeling. Sharp. Ugly. Jealousy. I hated it instantly because I had absolutely no right to feel it. Still, my chest tightened painfully anyway. "Oh," I said carefully. "Okay." Genevieve immediately noticed the change in my voice. "Rhea, it's fine. You're jealous." I scoffed quietly. "You are literally married." That doesn't answer my statement. I rubbed my forehead tiredly. "I'll let you answer him." Genevieve stayed quiet for a moment before whispering softly, "I wish you didn't sound hurt every time I say his name." That nearly broke me, because she sounded hurt too. After that, the trip somehow became harder for both of us. We missed each other too openly now. Too honestly. At one point, Genevieve called me at nearly 3 in the morning LA time just because she had seen a jazz bar in New York that reminded her of me. Another time, she made me stay on video call while she ate dinner because she hated eating alone now. And somehow the distance only made everything deeper. By the final week of her trip, I had started counting days without meaning to, which was dangerous. Because people like me should never count days waiting for married women to come home. One night, Genevieve called unusually early. Her voice sounded softer than normal. "Tired. Can I ask you something?" "That depends." A pause. Then, "Meet me in New York before I come back to LA." I frowned slightly. "What?" "I have 2 free days before returning home," she explained quietly. I was thinking, maybe we stay there together first. My pulse became uneven immediately. Genevieve continued before I could answer. "My assistant already booked a hotel suite." Sweet. Dangerous word. Instead, I heard myself asking, "When?" The smile in her voice afterward was immediate. "You're saying yes?" "That depends on the city." She laughed softly. "New York, nurse." And unfortunately, I agreed. I switched shifts at the hospital. Told another nurse I had a personal emergency. And for the first time in weeks, I started looking forward to something without fear attached to it. Then 2 nights before the trip, Genevieve called again. This time she sounded strange. Too quiet. Immediately I sat up straighter in bed. "What happened?" Long silence. Then softly she said, "Daniel's coming back from Tokyo." Everything inside me dropped instantly. "Oh." Genevieve inhaled shakily. "He found out I was planning to stay in New York 2 extra days before coming home." I closed my eyes briefly. And he said he missed me and wanted to pick me up himself from the airport. That hurt more than I expected. Not because Daniel had done anything wrong. Actually, that was the problem. He sounded like a good husband. Genevieve continued quietly. So we can't stay 2 days anymore. I swallowed carefully. Okay. No, Rhea. We always knew this would happen eventually. Her breathing became uneven through the phone. I'm still going to see you. How? We'll stay one night in New York instead, she whispered quickly. Then fly back the next day. One night. One stolen night squeezed between marriage and reality. And somehow that hurt even worse. Genevieve's voice softened afterward. I'm sorry. I laughed quietly without humor. You don't have to apologize for your husband existing. Silence. Heavy silence. Then softly she said, I wish things were different. Unfortunately. So did I. The first thing I noticed after Genevieve came home was how exhausted she looked. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the last 3 months had pulled something out of her and somehow, despite the designer clothes, the cameras, the flawless public appearances, and the impossible beauty, she looked more fragile standing in her father's living room than she ever had before. Daniel arrived with her from the airport. That part hurt more than I expected. I had spent 3 months building fantasies in my head like an idiot. About seeing her again. About finally touching her without a screen between us. About hearing her laugh in person instead of through late-night calls. And then reality reminded me exactly who I was. The nurse. Not the wife waiting at the airport. Not the woman wearing his ring. Just the nurse standing beside her father's medication cart while her husband carried her suitcase upstairs. Genevieve still found my eyes immediately the second she entered the room though. Like she had been searching for me first. That almost made it worse. Her father hugged her tightly while complaining dramatically about how thin she looked. Daniel laughed softly beside them. She barely sleeps during fashion season. That's because your industry is evil, her father muttered. Genevieve smiled faintly, but her eyes drifted back toward me again. And stayed there. Too long. Long enough that Daniel noticed. Jenny, he said lightly, amused, I told you already your stare intimidates people. She blinked immediately like she had forgotten herself. Then smiled casually and looked away. Maybe your nurse is secretly scared of me. I forced a small smile. If I survived your father, I can survive anyone. Her father pointed at me dramatically. She bullies me too. That's because you're dramatic. Daniel laughed again. And suddenly I hated how easy he was to like. That part felt deeply unfair. Because it would have been easier if he were cruel. Or neglectful. Or arrogant. But he wasn't. He loved her openly. Trusted her completely. And somehow that made me feel worse every single time I looked at him. That night, Genevieve kept trying to get me alone. Small excuses. Coffee. Extra blankets. Questions she absolutely did not need help with. And every single time, I escaped before we could be alone together. Because if I stayed near her too long while her husband stood 10 feet away smiling at us both, I was genuinely going to lose my mind. My phone buzzed constantly afterward. Genevieve. You're avoiding me. I ignored it. Another message. Genevieve. Rhea. Another. Genevieve. Please talk to me. I still didn't answer. Because what exactly was I supposed to say? Welcome home. Hope your husband enjoyed New York. Instead, I focused on work. Checked her father's vitals. Updated medication schedules. Anything except looking directly at Genevieve for too long. Unfortunately, Genevieve had apparently decided respecting emotional distance was no longer part of her personality. At one point near midnight, I went into the kitchen for coffee. 30 seconds later, she appeared behind me. Of course she did. You ignored every message, she whispered immediately. I kept my eyes on the coffee machine. Your husband is upstairs. And? I finally looked at her then. And that should matter. Something painful moved across her face briefly. It does matter. Clearly not enough. Genevieve exhaled slowly. You're angry. I laughed softly. What gave it away? You didn't come see me. That one almost broke my composure. You had your husband with you. I told you why. And I told you I understood. but you're still hurt. I stayed quiet, because denying it would have been embarrassing for both of us. Genevieve stepped closer carefully. Rhea. No. Her eyebrows pulled together slightly. No, you don't get to disappear into your marriage for days and then come back expecting me to act normal. Her face fell instantly. I wasn't disappearing. Not fair. I whispered. Genevieve, I spent 3 months missing someone I technically can't even admit I miss. That silenced her immediately. I continued before I lost the nerve. You called me every night. You kissed me. You made me feel like this actually meant something, and then the second you came home, reality came with you. Her eyes softened painfully. Rhea. I know who Daniel is, I continued quietly. I know he's your husband. I know you love him. I know I have absolutely no right feeling jealous every time he touches you. Genevieve looked genuinely devastated now. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, I said softly, you are. The silence afterward hurt, because neither of us knew how to fix this anymore. Then quietly, almost desperately, Genevieve asked, Are you leaving? I froze slightly, because somehow, that question sounded less about the job and more about her. I looked away briefly before answering. My contract ends soon. That's not what I asked. My chest tightened painfully. Genevieve moved closer again until her voice dropped softer. Are you leaving me? I swallowed hard. You never had me. That one landed brutally. I saw it immediately in her expression. For a second, she looked like I had physically hit her. Then softly she whispered, That's not true. Before I could answer, footsteps sounded upstairs. Daniel. Genevieve stepped back instantly. The distance between us returning so fast it almost made the entire conversation feel imaginary. Almost. Daniel entered the kitchen looking half asleep. There you are, he murmured to Genevieve. I thought you finally went to bed. She smiled immediately. Soft. Controlled. Public. I was just getting water. His arm slid naturally around her waist. And I had to look away. Because watching another person touch the woman occupying every part of my mind was becoming unbearable. Daniel glanced toward me politely. Sorry she's keeping you. I forced a professional smile. She's not the difficult patient in this house. That made him laugh. Genevieve didn't. She just looked at me quietly while her husband stood beside her. And somehow that hurt more than if she had touched me. The next 4 days were absolute torture. Not dramatic torture. Not screaming arguments or emotional breakdowns. Worse. Domestic torture. The kind where Genevieve and Daniel looked painfully normal together. Morning coffee together. Shared looks across rooms. Inside jokes I didn't understand. Small casual touches that probably meant nothing to them but somehow ruined my entire emotional stability every single time I saw them. And Genevieve kept looking at me like she was suffering too. That part was the problem. Because if she had looked happy, maybe I could have detached properly. But she didn't. She looked distracted constantly. Restless. Like her thoughts were somewhere else even while sitting beside her husband. Especially whenever I entered a room. Daniel noticed it before anyone else did. Of course he did. He was her husband. He noticed everything about her. That terrified me. One evening, Genevieve's father had fallen asleep early after finally agreeing to watch an old black and white movie downstairs. Daniel stayed with him while I updated medication records in the dining room. Genevieve appeared quietly beside me holding 2 mugs of tea. You skipped dinner, she murmured. I wasn't hungry. That's a lie. I kept writing without looking up. You should go spend time with your husband. The silence after that stretched too long. Then quietly she asked, Are you trying to punish me? I finally looked at her. No. It feels like you are. You're married, Genevieve. Pain flickered across her face immediately. I know that. Then stop looking at me like I'm the one making this complicated. That landed harder than I expected. She set the tea down carefully before whispering. You think this isn't destroying me too? I laughed softly under my breath. You still go upstairs to him every night. And you think that magically fixes what's happening inside my head? I looked away first. Because honestly, no answer felt safe anymore. Genevieve stared at me for another second before speaking again. He leaves tomorrow. My hand stopped moving over the paperwork. I hated that my body reacted before my brain could stop it. Genevieve noticed too. Of course she noticed. That matters to you, she whispered. I forced myself to continue writing again. It shouldn't. But it does. Neither of us spoke after that. Then quietly she asked, "Do you know what Daniel said to me this morning?" I frowned slightly despite myself. What? Genevieve gave a weak laugh. He asked if I was unhappy. That pulled my full attention immediately. And? I told him I was tired. That's not an answer. I know. Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. He kept looking at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. A strange, uncomfortable feeling settled in my stomach instantly. Does he suspect something? Genevieve shook her head immediately. No, not this. You sound very certain. Because Daniel would never imagine this. The way she said this hurt. Not because she was wrong. Because she sounded ashamed. Before I could answer, footsteps approached from the hallway. Daniel. Genevieve moved away from me immediately like instinct had taken over. Daniel entered carrying one of the blankets from downstairs. There you are, he said softly to his wife. Your father fell asleep during the movie again. Genevieve smiled faintly. He always does. Daniel walked closer before pressing a quick kiss against her forehead naturally. Effortlessly. Like loving her was the easiest thing in the world. And maybe that was what shattered me most. Not the marriage. Not the ring. The fact that he genuinely adored her. Then Daniel looked toward me. You work too hard, he said kindly. I don't think I've ever seen you properly rest. I almost laughed at the irony. If I stop moving, I'll probably collapse. That sounds unhealthy. You should hear her caffeine intake, Genevieve murmured quietly. Daniel smiled immediately. Oh, so you're finally exposing your nurse's secrets now? My nurse. The phrase shouldn't have affected me. Unfortunately, it did. Because Genevieve's eyes flicked toward mine afterward in a way that made the entire room suddenly feel too small. Daniel noticed none of it. Or maybe he noticed everything and trusted her too much to question it. Honestly, I didn't know which possibility scared me more. The next morning, Daniel left for Singapore again. Genevieve walked him outside while I remained upstairs pretending to organize medication trays that absolutely did not need organizing. I told myself I wasn't listening for the goodbye. Failed immediately. I heard her laugh softly downstairs. Heard him say something I couldn't make out. Then silence. Then the front door closing. And somehow the entire house changed afterward. Like the air itself relaxed. That realization alone made guilt crawl violently through me. Because what kind of person feels relieved when someone's husband leaves? Apparently me. 10 minutes later, Genevieve appeared in her father's room again. Quiet. Still. Looking directly at me. Neither of us spoke at first. Her father was asleep. The television downstairs still echoed faintly from where Daniel had forgotten to turn it off before leaving. Then Genevieve crossed the room slowly. You arranged another nurse yesterday, she said softly. Not a question. A statement. I kept checking the medication tray. Yes. Why? You don't really need overnight care anymore. My father maybe not. I finally looked at her then. Genevieve's voice became quieter afterward. But I do. That nearly broke my composure instantly. I looked away again. Genevieve. No, she whispered while stepping closer. You don't get to disappear from me because you're scared. I laughed softly in disbelief. I'm scared. Yes. Her eyes held mine fully now. You've already decided to leave before I even asked you to stay. The terrifying thing was, she was right. I avoided being alone with Genevieve for the rest of that day. Not because I wanted distance. Because I didn't trust myself anymore. Daniel was gone now. The house felt quieter without him in it. More dangerous somehow. And Genevieve had stopped pretending she was okay with the idea of me leaving. That was the problem. Because every time she looked at me now, it felt intentional. Open. Like she had finally stopped fighting herself and unfortunately expected me to stop fighting too. Which would have been easier if I weren't already halfway destroyed. That evening, I arrived for my shift to find her father arguing with one of the kitchen staff over soup. Again. This tastes like punishment, he complained dramatically. It's tomato soup, I said while walking into the room. That's exactly the issue. Genevieve's father brightened immediately after seeing me. Finally. Someone intelligent. You say that every time I bring your medication. Because intelligent people bring drugs. I laughed softly while checking his pulse. And then I felt it. That stare. I looked up instinctively. Genevieve was watching me from the sofa. Quietly. Her chin resting lightly against her hand. And the expression on her face nearly made my heart stop. Not flirtation. Not teasing. Something worse. Affection. Unhidden affection. I looked away first immediately. Because her father was literally 3 feet away. After dinner, he eventually fell asleep while old jazz music played quietly in the background. The mansion became still again. And unfortunately, stillness had become dangerous for us. I was updating notes beside the bed when Genevieve spoke softly behind me. You're really leaving? Not a question. I finished writing before answering. My contract ends next week. You could renew it. That wouldn't be smart. For who? I turned then. For both of us. Genevieve stared at me for a long moment. Then finally she stood from the sofa slowly. What if I don't care about smart anymore? My pulse became uneven immediately. You should. I tried that already, she whispered. It's miserable. I exhaled quietly and rubbed my forehead. Genevieve. No, listen to me first. Her voice shook slightly now. And somehow that scared me more than tears ever could. Because Genevieve Vale was not someone who lost composure easily. I spent 3 months convincing myself distance would fix this, she continued quietly. Then I came home and the first thing I wanted was you. I stayed silent. Not because I had nothing to say. Because everything I wanted to say was dangerous. Genevieve walked closer carefully. You know what the worst part is? She whispered. I looked at her despite myself. I think about you constantly. My chest tightened painfully. In interviews, she continued softly. In hotel rooms. In cars. During fittings. Sometimes I hear my phone buzz and my heart actually starts racing because I think it's you. I closed my eyes briefly. Because hearing the things I felt reflected back at me was becoming unbearable. You're occupying every part of me, she whispered. There it was. The sentence that should have made me happy. Instead, it made me feel like we were both walking towards something that could ruin us. You're married, I said quietly again. And immediately I regretted it. Because the look on her face afterward. God. Like she was exhausted of hearing reality spoken out loud. I know, she whispered painfully. Then stop. I can't. The honesty in that answer shook me. Genevieve stepped closer again until there was barely space left between us. I tried to let you go, she admitted softly. You think I avoided you after the kitchen because I didn't care? She laughed weakly. Rhea, I was barely holding myself together. I looked away. You're making this harder. Good, she whispered immediately. That startled me enough to look back at her. Genevieve's eyes were glassy now. Because you keep acting like leaving me is somehow the kinder option. It is kinder. To who? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because honestly, I didn't know anymore. Then suddenly Genevieve did something completely unexpected. She knelt. Actually knelt in front of me. I stared at her in complete shock. Genevieve. Don't leave. The words came out broken. Barely above a whisper. And seeing someone like her kneeling in front of me nearly destroyed something inside my chest permanently. I moved immediately trying to pull her up. What are you doing? She held onto my hands tighter instead. I'm serious. You are absolutely not kneeling on the floor begging me right now. I will if that's what it takes. My throat tightened painfully. Please stand up. No. Genevieve. Her voice cracked softly. I don't care about the job anymore. That silenced me instantly. She looked up at me with tears filling her eyes again. I just want you to stay. The room suddenly felt too small. Too emotional. Too real. You don't mean that, I whispered carefully. Yes, I do. You're overwhelmed. And you're lying to yourself. That landed hard because unfortunately, she was right again. Genevieve stood slowly afterward, but didn't let go of my hands. I'm not asking you to take care of my father anymore, she whispered. I'm asking for 2 days. I frowned slightly. What? Come away with me. My heartbeat stumbled immediately. Genevieve swallowed nervously before continuing. Anywhere. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere nobody knows us. I stared at her. And the terrifying part was that for one dangerous second, I actually imagined saying yes. She saw it too. Hope flickered instantly across her face. When we come back, she whispered carefully, if you still want to leave after that, I won't stop you. I should have said no immediately. That would have been the smart thing. The safe thing. Instead, I stood there staring at Genevieve while my brain completely failed to function properly. Because she looked sincere. Terrifyingly sincere. Not like a celebrity trying to escape boredom. Not like a married woman chasing excitement. She looked like someone genuinely afraid of losing the person she loved. And unfortunately, that realization ruined me. You're asking me to run away with you for 2 days, I said carefully. Genevieve nodded once. Yes. You realize how insane that sounds? Yes. And you still think it's a good idea? No, she admitted softly. I think it's a terrible idea. That almost made me laugh. Almost. But I also think if you leave this house right now, she whispered, I'm going to spend the rest of my life regretting it. The honesty in her voice made my chest ache. I looked away briefly before asking quietly, what exactly are these 2 days supposed to change? Genevieve stayed silent for a moment. Then finally, maybe nothing. That answer surprised me. She stepped closer slowly. But maybe they give us one honest memory before everything becomes impossible again. I swallowed hard. Because that was the problem with Genevieve. Even when she was being selfish, she somehow sounded heartbreakingly genuine. My voice came out quieter than I intended. And what happens after? Her eyes dropped briefly. We come home. That's it? No, she whispered. That's the terrifying part. The room became silent again except for the soft sound of rain outside the windows. Her father remained asleep behind us, completely unaware that his daughter was emotionally destroying her nurse 5 feet away from his bed. I rubbed my forehead slowly. This is a mess. I know. You're still married. Her face tightened slightly at that. I know. And I'm still trying very hard not to become the worst decision of your life. Genevieve looked directly at me then. You're not the worst thing that's ever happened to me, Rhea. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. Her voice softened afterward. But you need to stop acting like I don't understand the consequences here. I looked at her quietly. And for the first time, I realized something uncomfortable. Genevieve was not confused anymore. Scared? Absolutely. Overwhelmed? Definitely. But confused? No. She knew exactly what she felt now. That should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything infinitely worse. Because if she knew and still wanted me anyway, then what exactly were we doing? My phone buzzed suddenly in my pocket. Camille. A message preview flashed across the screen. Still alive? Or has your celebrity finally kidnapped you? Genevieve noticed the name immediately, and the change in her expression was instant. Small. Subtle. But there. Jealousy. I should not have found that attractive. Unfortunately, I did. You still talk to her every day, she asked too casually. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. She checks on me. Genevieve nodded slowly. She likes you. The way she said it made me exhale softly. Camille also thinks I'm emotionally unavailable. Genevieve looked down briefly before murmuring. She's probably right. That answer hit harder than expected. Because it wasn't cruel. Just sad. I leaned back lightly against the desk behind me. You know the worst part? Genevieve looked up again. I was actually trying to move on. Pain flickered across her face immediately. I know. I went on dates because of you. That startled her slightly. What? I laughed quietly without humor. You kept talking about how I deserve someone good. Someone available. So I tried. Genevieve stayed very still. And? I looked directly at her. You ruined that for me too. Her breathing caught softly. Because we both knew exactly what I meant. How was I supposed to sit across from another woman pretending interest while secretly comparing every laugh, every smile, every glance to Genevieve? It had become impossible. Genevieve walked toward me again slowly. I didn't mean to ruin anything. I know. But I'm selfish enough to be relieved I did. That confession nearly broke my remaining restraint completely. The room suddenly felt smaller again. Warmer. Dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with physical attraction anymore. This was worse. Because now feelings were involved. Real ones. Genevieve stopped directly in front of me. Close enough that I could see the faint exhaustion beneath her eyes. You don't have to answer tonight, she whispered carefully. About the trip. I frowned slightly. What changed? Her smile came sadly this time. I don't want you saying yes because you feel guilty for me. I stared at her quietly. And if I say yes because I want you? That visibly affected her. Her eyes softened instantly. Then she whispered. That would be harder to survive. Neither of us moved after that. And maybe that was the most dangerous part. Not the kissing. Not the tension. The fact that standing close to each other had started feeling natural. Like we already belonged in each other's space. Then softly, almost nervously, Genevieve asked, if I leave right now before I do something reckless, will you at least think about it? I should have protected myself. Protected both of us. Instead, I heard myself answer quietly. Yes. And the look of hope that appeared on her face afterward made me realize I was already in far too deep. The house felt different now. Not quieter. Not louder. Just suspended. Like something between Genevieve and me had already started moving even though neither of us had physically left yet. She had stopped pushing. Stopped pulling. Stopped trying to corner every moment of my attention. And somehow that made everything worse. Because now I was the one noticing her. The way she lingered a second too long in doorways. The way she looked at me like she was trying to memorize something she might lose. And the way she always stopped herself from saying more. Like restraint had become the only thing holding her together. That evening, Camille picked me up after my shift. She was waiting outside the hospital entrance leaning casually against her car like she had done this 100 times before. When I got in, she smiled. Hi, beautiful. I let out a small breath of laughter. You're spoiling me. And yet, she said lightly while starting the car, you still refuse to choose me. The tone was teasing. Her eyes were not. She drove us to a small restaurant near the city center. Nothing fancy. Just warm lighting, quiet music, and enough privacy to breathe. For the first few minutes, we talked normally. Work. Patience. Traffic. Anything except the things sitting heavily between us. Then Camille finally placed her glass down and looked directly at me. Can we talk? Sure, I said softly. She studied my face for a moment before speaking. I think I'm going to be the one who gets hurt. My chest tightened immediately. What do you mean? Camille exhaled quietly. The favorite part of my day has become knowing I'll see you. She gave a small laugh. Which is honestly embarrassing considering how unavailable you are emotionally. I looked down briefly. She continued softly. You told me you wanted to try. And I believed you. I did mean it. I know. She nodded once. But I also know your heart has been somewhere else the entire time. That hurt because it was true. Camille leaned back slightly. I don't want to be the person you used to forget someone you still think about every night. Silence settled between us. Then she looked toward my phone lying beside my hand. You smiled differently with this person. That pulled my attention up immediately. What? She nodded toward the screen. With me, you smile politely. Her voice stayed calm. With whoever that is, you forget you're doing it. Guilt settled heavily inside my chest. Camille sighed softly afterward. It's her, isn't it? I froze. Not because she knew specifically. Because I suddenly realized how obvious this had become. Camille studied my expression for one painful second before laughing quietly to herself. Oh wow. It actually is. I rubbed my forehead immediately. It's complicated. She's married. I looked up sharply. Camille gave me a tired look. You literally described a gorgeous, emotionally unavailable woman who keeps ruining your peace. There are only two possibilities there. She paused. Married or a musician. Despite everything, I laughed. Camille smiled faintly too, but sadness stayed in her eyes. Do you love her? That question landed hard. Because I still hadn't allowed myself to say the word out loud. And my silence answered for me. Camille nodded slowly afterward. Okay, I'm sorry. Don't apologize for feelings. She looked down briefly before adding quietly, just don't let someone destroy you while trying to figure themselves out. Then softer. I'll wait for you. I frowned slightly. Camille. But if it works out with her, she continued gently, I'll move on. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I was choosing Camille, but because I wasn't. She paid the bill before I could argue and drove me back to the mansion afterward. The ride home was quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just honest in a way that left both of us tired. When I entered the mansion later that night, Genevieve was sitting beside her father's bed pretending to read something on her tablet. But the second I walked in, her eyes lifted immediately. Relief crossed her face before she could hide it. You're late, her father muttered sleepily. I'm on time, I replied automatically. You're always late. This time Genevieve smiled softly at that. Small. Tired. Beautiful. I checked his medication, adjusted his blanket, and updated his chart while trying very hard not to look at her too much. Unfortunately, she kept looking at me. When her father finally drifted back to sleep, I left the room quietly. A few minutes later, I found Genevieve standing alone in the kitchen pouring herself tea. She looked up when I entered. You went home first, she said quietly. I had dinner. The tiniest shift crossed her expression. With Camille. I nodded once. Genevieve looked down at her cup briefly. That hurt her. I could see it clearly. But when she looked back up, her voice stayed calm. I need your answer, Rhea. My heartbeat slowed immediately. Genevieve placed the mug down carefully. I need to know tonight if you're coming with me tomorrow. She paused softly. If you say no, I'll understand. I stared at her for a moment. Then finally, okay. She blinked. Okay. I nodded once. I'll switch shifts at the hospital tomorrow morning. For 1 second, Genevieve genuinely looked stunned. Then suddenly her entire face brightened. Not glamorous. Not controlled. Just happy. Purely happy. And before either of us could think properly, she grabbed my arm and kissed me. Fast. Warm. Impulsive. When she pulled back, her eyes widened immediately. Oh my God, I'm sorry, she whispered quickly. I got excited and forgot how to behave like a normal person. I looked at her quietly for a second before saying, now that you've gotten what you want, can I check on your father? That made her laugh so suddenly she had to cover her mouth to stay quiet. The next afternoon we left the city together. Genevieve chose a private island resort where photographs were prohibited completely. No paparazzi. No fan accounts. No hidden cameras. The moment we arrived, I looked around in disbelief. This actually exists? Genevieve smiled while removing her sunglasses. A lot of celebrities need places where they can breathe without ending up online 5 minutes later. She glanced at me lightly. One of the few advantages of fame. The island was beautiful. Quiet beaches. Warm air. White villas hidden between palm trees. No chaos. No pressure. Just space. For the first time in months, Genevieve looked relaxed. Really relaxed. That evening she took me to dinner near the water. No designer gowns. No cameras. Just Genevieve in a simple black dress smiling at me across candlelight like this actually meant something to her. Which somehow made it more dangerous. Halfway through dinner, she rested her chin lightly against her hand and said, "You know, Camille is winning." I nearly choked on my drink. What? She's had dinners with you. Walks with you. Time with you. Genevieve sighed dramatically. Meanwhile, I had to emotionally collapse before getting one date. I laughed to spite myself. Then softly she added, "By the way, you look very pretty in that dress." That one landed harder than it should have. Because Genevieve rarely flirted casually. When she complimented someone, she meant it. After dinner, we walked slowly back toward the villa together. The air smelled like salt and rain. When we stepped inside, Genevieve hesitated near the doorway. Then awkwardly she said, "So, I booked a suite with one bedroom." She glanced at me carefully. "But if you're uncomfortable sharing a bed with me, I can get another suite immediately." I stared at her, then slowly replied, "If you're taking me on dates, because Camille has been getting too much of my attention." I stepped closer slightly. "Then I should probably admit I've spent months imagining sleeping beside you too." Genevieve's breath caught softly. I continued quietly, "Especially when your husband was around." That visibly affected her immediately. We changed separately afterward and eventually ended up lying on opposite sides of the massive bed. Neither of us asleep. Neither pretending to be. The room stayed dark except for soft light from the balcony doors. After a long silence, I turned onto my side to face her. "You know how you said Camille is winning?" I murmured. Genevieve looked at me without interrupting. "I've imagined this too many times." Her expression softened instantly. I swallowed slowly before continuing. "Sometimes when I saw you with your husband, I laughed weakly at myself. My thoughts would go completely insane wondering what happened between you two once your bedroom door closed." Genevieve inhaled sharply. "If he can barely keep his hands off you outside the room, then I..." She whispered my name immediately. "Rhea." Embarrassment hit me instantly, and I tried turning away. But Genevieve moved closer quickly, wrapping an arm around my waist and pulling me gently back against her. A soft spoon position. Warm. Careful. Intimate enough to make my pulse lose rhythm completely. She buried her face lightly near my shoulder and whispered, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For making you think about things that hurt you." Silence settled around us afterward. Not uncomfortable. Just full. Then Genevieve's fingers tightened slightly against my waist before she whispered, "You might have to be more explicit." I laughed softly against the pillow. "You really want to hear all the things I imagined?" "Yes." Her voice came quieter this time. "Tell me everything." I turned slowly in her arms until we were facing each other fully. So close I could feel her breathing. "If I say it exactly the way I want to," I whispered carefully, "I might end up wanting to do every single thing I imagined." Genevieve completely melted after that. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. No hesitation anymore. No fear. Then softly she whispered, "I promise I'll let you do whatever you want." I stared at her for one dangerous second before laughing quietly. YouTube policies would probably remove us immediately if I answered that honestly. So, as your virtual girlfriend, how about I tell you all about it somewhere uncensored instead? To hear what happened between Rhea and Genevieve behind closed doors on the island, and to find out whether forbidden love survives reality, continue the story on Patreon as we are not able to tell all story here. We'll be waiting for you there. And before you go, I just want to say thank you for spending your time with me and making it all the way to the end of this story. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe so you don't miss our future stories, leave a comment, and tell me your name. I would love to give a special shout out to some of you in future episodes and welcome you personally to our growing family. Your support, your comments, and your presence here mean more than you know. Take care of yourselves for me.